everyone and welcome to this month's masterclass, which is all about solving guesses. If you're not quite clear on what a guess is, then it's a situation where you're trying to guess which opponent has which missing card. Sometimes it can be a situation where it's an honor, sometimes it can be a situation where you're guessing how a suit breaks, but it's actually slightly a misleading name because there are actually times when they're not really guesses at all because they're completely solvable with the clues that you have. So sometimes it can be that you think there's a problem, but you just don't realise that all the clues are out there for you. So today I want to talk you through some of the clues, but of course there will still be situations where it is a guess. You have to do what's more probable, but it won't always work out. Sometimes it will. Okay, first of all, let's talk about common guess situations. So trying to get used to not only the terminology, but just the kind of scenarios you might be in where you might have to make decisions like this. And then we'll talk about ways you might be able to gather clues or even solve your guess. First, the situations. This is a really, really common one. Where you are missing the ace and queen of a suit, but you have the king and the jack. And you have to guess who has the ace and who has the queen. In a situation like the one here, you only have a singleton in your hand as declarer. Presumably you're in a suit contract, and you play this suit, and you have one chance to create a trick. Now, it's up to you. If you decide to play the king, then that means that you are hoping that your left-hand opponent started with the ace, so that your king just wins the trick straight away. Alternatively, you could play the jack, which would be hoping that left-hand opponent started with the queen. It might be that this jack ends up pushing out the ace from right-hand opponent, or it could be that left-hand opponent even has both cards. But either is fine. Even if right-hand opponent does win with the ace, it establishes your king. Another situation, really, really common, often in trump suits but not exclusively. You hold a tennis against the queen in each hand and have to decide which direction to finesse in. Like in this heart suit that you see here, you have the ace and the jack in one hand, which are a tennis against the queen, because you have the king. And similarly, you have the king and the 10 in the other hand, which are a tennis against the queen because you happen to have the ace and the jack in the other. If you think that it's left-hand opponent who has the queen, then the finesse you should take should be through left-hand opponent, therefore low towards the jack. However, if you think that it's right-hand opponent who has the queen, then you want to be playing small to the 10, and that would be hoping that the 10 is winning when the queen is on your right. Another common guess situation that we're going to discuss in this masterclass is whether you should be finessing when you've seen an honor or intermediate card drop. It's a bit easier to spot these when it's an honor that's dropped because immediately in your head alarm bells go off. I've seen an honor, that's really weird. Should I do something with that information? When they're intermediate cards, they can still give you very, very important clues. So don't miss them. That's the hardest thing with these. You have to notice that they fall. Right, so you have a dummy like ace, king, 10 to 5. Opposite, the 4 small in your own hand. And crucially, when the first round of the suit is played, you play small to the ace and suddenly the jack falls from right-hand opponent. So you were just planning to do a basic 9 never with this. You were going to bash out your second honor. But now you've got a bit of a decision to make. You could still bash out the honor, hoping that right-hand opponent just had Queen Jack Doubleton in the suit. However, if it turns out that the Jack is a singleton, then that means that left-hand opponent has 3 diamonds to the Queen, and you should actually be taking a finesse instead. So you've got a decision there about what to do. So now we've kind of looked at some very common situations. First, we're going to talk about ways that we have of gathering clues. And then finally, we're going to apply these clues to try to discuss the examples in context. So in the examples that we're going to talk about, it can sometimes be that your guess is completely solved and you don't have to worry about whether you're right when you play it, because you're so convinced of the truth that you just know what the hand is. Those are always really nice. It could also be that the correct guess is just a bit more probable than the alternative. So sometimes you just have to go with the probabilities and accept that sometimes they won't work out. Sometimes you will lose to the other scenario because you don't have a way of knowing for sure. So the first thing to think about is, what have the opponent's hands shown in terms of honours? So what have they said about their points? Have they done lots of bidding? Have they not done very much bidding? And have they promised honours from the way they've defended so far? You know, have they shown top of sequence leads? Have they promised an honour by the card that they've led? And you can find out a lot of these things by asking the opponent's questions quite diligently. You don't need to be embarrassed about asking them questions about their methods. You're completely entitled to do so, and you can use the privilege. So food for thought when you're thinking about these honours. How many high card points did their bid show? If they've shown a no trump range, then from what you've seen so far, how close are they to fulfilling that? Are there some cards they have to make it up to that number? Are there some cards they definitely can't have because that would give them too many points? Or it might be a situation where their partner opened one of a suit and then they were unable to respond. So now we know that they didn't have 6 points. So if you've seen an honour from them, maybe that's the only honour they have, depending on what it is. Did they fail to open the bidding? Does that mean that they can't possibly have more than 11 points? And even then, they might have opened. Have they shown a sequence of honours from their lead? So maybe they've led a top of sequence, maybe they've led a king promising a queen, or a queen promising a jack, etc. So now let's apply this to our first quandary that we had. We had to decide who had the ace and who had the queen. So now we can think about things in a bit more of a concrete way. If our left-hand opponent passed initially, and we've already seen that they have the ace, king, queen of clubs, then they're not going to have the ace of clubs. Sorry, the ace of spades, that should be. Because if they did have the ace of spades, they would have opened the bidding. So you've already seen a pass from them. Alternatively, it could be that right-hand opponent failed to respond to left-hand opponent's opening of one club. But you've already seen that they had a queen, so it can't be that they also have an ace. That means you should instead play the king, because you know that the ace has to be on your left. What about another method of solving a guess, or aiding a guess even? This one is more of an aid. This gives you probabilities. It doesn't always give you concrete. And that's vacant spaces. Sounds kind of tricky, and the explanation is somewhat wordy. But the idea is that it's the number of spaces in each opponent's hand that is kind of unaccounted for. So those might be cards that are in the suit that you're trying to make the guess in. if you know that one of the opponents has a whole bunch of cards in one suit, then, say it's spades, then the number of non-spades in their hands are all potentially cards in your guessing suit. Things to think about when you're considering the vacant spaces. If one of your opponents has overcalled and therefore shown a 5-card suit, and their partner has raised with 3-card support, then you know that the person with 5 cards in the suit has fewer vacant spaces than the person who has 3 cards in the suit. And therefore there's a difference of 2 vacant spaces. So often it's the difference between the opponent's spaces which leads you to make your guess. An opponent who has led a 4-card suit against no trumps has more vacant spaces than an opponent who could still have a 5-card suit. This is a kind of tricky one, but remember, people are leading their long suits against no trumps. It's a really good idea. So if they've led a 4-card suit, they don't also have a 5-card suit. Whereas their partner hasn't had the opportunity to make a choice yet about which suit they play, so they could still have a 5-card suit in their hand. However, sometimes the vacant spaces can look a certain way when you consider only one of the suits, but you might later find out something about one of the other suits that changes the number of vacant spaces available. So for example, thinking about this overcaller with the partner who raised once again. Overcaller leads a singleton in a different suit. Maybe it's a really obvious singleton, maybe you see them trump, and now you have to make a decision. You know that the person who overcalled had 5 cards in their suit. Sure. You also know that they had 1 card in a different suit. So that's a total of 6. Whereas their partner had 3 cards in the overcalled suit, but now, let's say you know they have 5 cards in the other suit. Okay, so now they actually have 8 cards that are accounted for, and that means that the overcaller is the one that has more vacant spaces, even though they took a bid. So the probabilities can actually sway when you learn more about the hand. That's why it's sometimes good to delay these decisions until you have as much information as possible about the distribution of the hand. But sometimes you can't always afford to wait. Let's look at this in the context of the second example that we talked about before. We want to be finessing against the opponent who has more vacant spaces. So if we only have the information about the overcaller and the raiser, we want to be finessing against the raiser, not the overcaller. Whereas if we find out this extra information where there's another suit that's 5-1, and the overcaller is the one with the singleton, then you'd actually want to finesse against overcaller. The important thing to remember, it kind of goes with the territory of vacant spaces, but it's worth mentioning just to be really explicit. The more spaces a player has in their hand for hearts, the more spaces they have for a specific heart. In this case, the queen. That's the only one we care about. So the more hearts they have, the more spaces they have available for the queen of hearts. Finally, another way of solving a guess could be to apply the principle of restricted choice, commonly known as PRC. Now this one boggles the mind, but it's really, really important to just understand that it's true. It's difficult to kind of get your head around, but the simplest way of explaining it is that when you know that an opponent has been dealt 2 honours or intermediates of equal value, so something like the Queen Jack that we saw earlier, he can freely choose which one to play underneath the higher card. You know this is true. When you get dealt Queen Jack Doubleton, sometimes you'll feel a little bit cheeky when you play your higher one, and sometimes you'll just follow suit with the lower one. And as a good defender, you should be evenly splitting what you do. About half the time you should be playing the queen, half the time you should be playing the jack. Don't do the same thing every time, because if you do, your opponents will start to learn that you always play the same one. So, if you have both of those cards, and you only have 2 cards that you could play, then it's 50% which one you play. However, if you have a singleton, honor or intermediate, your only choice is to play the one that you have. And therefore, it's 100% that you'll play that one. So as declarer, when you see one of these cards pop up, it's much, much more likely that the person has played it because they don't have a choice about playing it, than that they played it because they had a choice but they chose to play that one. And therefore, it's more likely that the card is in singleton. So, let's apply it to this example. We are missing the queen and the jack. We cash the first round of the suit and we see the jack fall. We know that the queen is missing. But by applying the principle of restricted choice, we know that right-hand opponent, if they had a singleton jack, would only ever play the jack. Whereas if they had the queen and the jack, they might have played either one. Therefore, the assumption you should make is that right-hand opponent holds a singleton, and so you should take a finesse against your left-hand opponent. Of course, it won't always work. Sometimes they will be dealt Queen Jack Doubleton. But we're going with the probabilities here. And it is more likely to work if you take a finesse. Thank you for watching this lesson. Now it's time to put it into practice a little bit. It's a difficult lesson, so feel free to watch it again before you try playing the hands. But when you feel ready, go ahead, give them a go. There are some tricky things in there, but I think you'll find it really interesting, and it's a good way of really developing the way you visualize what's going on in bridge. Okay, happy playing everyone, and I'll see you after each deal.